Welcome back to the Director's Garage. I am your host and resident idiot, Michael, and today, folks, we're revisiting an amp that has redefined my headphone experience. I'm talking about the Bakoon 13r. Now, this is an amp I bought specifically to drive the Hifiman Susvara, hands down the most difficult headphone on the planet to push electrons through. Now, it's been a long journey for this Cisfara, but I can finally say I've got this thing where I want it to be, which is to say it finally sounds right.
Yes.
And today I'm going to tell you all about it. This is going to be long, so buckle up. You see, I've been staying up late, putting the Bakun through its paces. Now, I've been headphone swapping and running through track after track, trying to get to a place where I can describe to you guys what's going on and how this amp has changed my headphone experience. But first, let's talk about some of the quirks of this amp. I've learned a few things. Now, I'm going to get some of the annoyances out of the way first. Some would argue that the biggest annoyance on this episode is your director, but I digress. There's no direct on-off button on the Bakun. Now, you can simply turn the volume control up, and that will turn the amp on. But this amp is kind of meant to be used with its included remote control. A confusing bugger of a remote that's a serious flaw. Now, none of these bottom buttons seem to have any function that I can tell. And then there's the whole low power, high power situation. Now follow me. To switch modes, you have to first power the amp off using the annoying remote control. Then you hold down the only knob on the entire unit for 5 seconds. You push it in. When you do that, the first 2 LEDs will start blinking. You rotate the knob 1 notch to the right so that the next 2 are blinking, and you're there. But wait, you want to be even more confused? If you rotate that same knob 1 more notch, all 3 lights will turn on and blink. But this isn't a high power mode. What mode is it? I don't know. There's no documentation for it. But after you get those right 2 LEDs lit, you sit and wait for the mode to clear, or simply the whole display go dark, and then you can power the amp back on. It's crazy, it's quirky, and a bad design. Now, with this minimalist design, I get what they're going for, but it falls way short. Case in point, let's talk about the volume control. Now, this is a stepped attenuator, and it's digital. There are 50 steps to max volume, and each time you rotate the knob, you get a click. So turn it up, click, 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 click. You can't be serious. Oh, yes, they are, and there's no way to defeat it. And rather than just having some simple LED strip or a percentage to tell you where your volume is set, you have 2 rows of LEDs. Now, the bottom row tells you how many tenths of a click you've opened up. The top row, tells you how many groups of 10 you've passed. Like, what the hell were you guys drinking the day you came up with this? But wait, if you turn the volume knob too fast, you'll jump inputs. That's how you change inputs. Who thinks of this stuff? And every time you unplug the headphone jack, as a safety, the volume resets to 0. It's a good safety feature, but then you have to go through the monotonous click, 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 click ritual again. Now, it's a little easier to navigate on the remote, but this remote isn't labeled at all. Now, note to Enlium, this is formerly Bakun, just give us a power toggle and a gain toggle. I shouldn't need some decoder ring to figure out how your amp works. Next, let's talk about the heat. Now, this thing gets hot, really hot, and it dissipates all that heat through the bottom of the amp, through these massive heat sinks that double as feet. Another note is that the headphone jack itself gets all 25 watts that the Bakun can muster. Now, that's a good thing. There's no need to do some wacky banana cable jumper thing, but the downside is that there's no way to input or output a balanced signal to or from the amp, and most of my gear runs balanced, including the headphones. They're all like 4-pin or Pentacon. But then you get to the sound and you realize that all that complaining doesn't matter a single bit. I should state, because of some legal wrangling, Bakun is now called Enlium, and the 13R is end-of-lifed, primarily due to lack of parts. So picking up a new one isn't possible. You can buy the successor to the 13R called the Enlium 23R. It's a bit heftier and features a bit more of an industrial look. Inside, though, it's the same power setup, 25 watts, and some things are refined. But from everything I've read, if you already have the 13R, you'd be upgrading primarily for bragging rights. Now, you saw in the What's in the Box episode, the 13R is a total wow. And I'm going to focus in on the Cisfara, at least at first, since that's the reason I purchased this thing. But I will get into some of the other experiences the Bakun has brought me. I'm going to start with some sound structure on the Cisfara, and we're going to start with the bass. Now, I'm not getting the slam of some of my other headphones, like the Abyss 1266TC or the LCD-5. What I do note is a thickened, even more detailed bass, and it's wonderful. Now, where before it was just kind of okay, there's now an emotional, rich sub-bass that I hadn't been able to tap in the past, and it's formidable. On Pink Floyd's Animals, I'll talk more about that later, listening to Dogs, there's an eerie sub-synth throughout the entire song that changes the character of the song. You feel it. Under the Ferrum stack, it's just not there. You get some bass, but it's kind of some mid-bass. That sub-presence on the Cisfara is completely missing. Under the Bakun's power, these things bring a rumble from the lowest of low frequencies, and the bass presence is tremendously improved. Yet it still retains that speed few headphones like the Cisfara can do. It puts the Cisfara up in the stratosphere of headphone bass experiences. Let's talk about the mids. And the mids were always a Cisfara standout, and things only improve due to gains in detail. The Bakun is a speed monster, and you're pairing it with one of the fastest headphones you can find, and the result is detail madness. Female voices, male voices, piano, strings, magic, magic, magic. And it's also thickened up the upper mids. This is the area of greatest weakness on the Cisfara under my other amps. Now, there's still a little of that transparency here, but it's much diminished. This is what I've always wanted from the Cisfara, and they've never given it to me like a petulant child. On the top end, there's more air, more detail. That means that cymbals and bells dance across the soundstage with crispness and focus and pinpoint accuracy. I wrote that myself. Okay. Brightness, though, is not in the equation. It's very much like an electrostatic experience now in the treble. Wicked fast, but still musical. This amp elevates the game in nearly all areas, and I'm now going to talk about some of the sound properties, too. Let's go with imaging and supreme focus on the Cisfara. These were already one of the best imaging headphones, and things just got that much better. Soundstage saw some improvement. It's more that the detail is so improved that things like reverb give off a greater sense of expansive space. Though the headphone itself doesn't extend out to the furthest reaches, it never really has. The Cisfara always has been, to my ears, an imaging headphone first. I can't say enough about the speed. These are about as fast as an electrostatic, but not nearly as hyper-analytical. Translated, they don't lose their musicality and become kind of a sum of the musical parts. Dynamics score a huge improvement with all this newfound speed. These things react with impact and surprise, and it gives the Cisfara a fun factor I think they were sorely lacking, even if they aren't an endgame in slam. Now when I switched back to the Ferrum stack, the sound got warmer, but that sound stage narrowed up and I lost detail. That deep sub completely evaporates and the image smears considerably too. So it's an easy call for the Bakun over the Ferrum stack, but you kind of hope so given that it's literally double the price. So now we've looked at all of the impressive things the Bakun brings to the Cisfara, but do all boats rise in this gathering tide? I mean, if it can do these amazing things for the Cisfara, surely there must be new territory ahead for, say, the Abyss 1266TC, the Focal Utopia, the LCD-5, and the Meze Elite, right? Now, the LCD-5 finished dead last in the Mega Shootout, and other than the Cisfara, the LCD-5 receives the biggest gains with the Bakun in the chain. That's exciting to hear. Music on the LCD-5 gets much thicker under the Bakun's power, and it adds to its blazing fast class-leading speed. The bass picks up impact. It also improves the sub, which was nearly completely missing under lesser-powered amps. Now you can feel a sub-bass presence. I still wish it had more bass accentuation. I'm still hoping Audeze sees to it to release a bass-heavy Director's Garage version of the LCD-5. The only real negative under the Bakun is that the headphone became a little bit more mid-forward. Dave Brubeck's Take 5 seemed a bit out of balance with the sax having greater presence than it maybe should. But it does add excitement and better dynamics to its feature set. I can comfortably say, paired with the Bakun, the LCD-5 would most certainly rank much higher if I'd done the $30,000 shootout using the Bakun. It wouldn't quite get to that top tier level though, because I still would like more overall bass presence in the mix for my personal taste, and it's now a little bit mid-forward, shy of neutral, but it's a headphone to be reckoned with when paired with the 13R. Now, while I hate to break up a winning pairing, the Bakun brings an even greater clarity to the Abyss and an even more authoritative bass, if you can imagine that. The Ferrum was my old benchmark for the Abyss, at least of everything I paired it with, but this Bakun takes away nothing that I can tell while adding to the greatness of already world-class performance that is the Abyss. So next I'm going to talk about the LCD-4, and what I can say, folks, is it's complicated because I just did like the LCD-5, the Abyss, and the Cisfara under the Bakun, where it's got amazing image and all this speed and everything's just impressive. And the LCD-4 just doesn't keep up with the technicals of those headphones, though it's still impressive. It's just not on the level of those other three. They're a little bit darker, and the amp didn't really alter much about the general presentation of the sound. I think there's more detail in the LCD-4 under the Bakun, but it's pretty close. I don't think I could pass a blind taste test on the LCD-4, whereas on those others, I likely could. There seems to be more bass authority on the Bakun, and I would expect that with all the extra power, but this headphone seems a little more amp agnostic to me. But the LCD-4 isn't quite as impressive now that I've heard the Cisfara with the Bakun. The Bakun elevates the Cisfara past the LCD-4, in my opinion. I still love the slam of the LCD-4, and on rock, there are a few better headphones, and the Bakun certainly doesn't disappoint. Audeze's former flagship still have a permanent place in the Director's Garage here, but they lost a little luster doing all these comparisons. Still, they're terrific and one of my most used sets. Now, the Meze Elite already has tremendous bass impact in slam under normal amplification. Well, it's a bit much when you use the Bakun with them. It's a dominating bass wall of sound. The bass overrides the rest of the frequencies by a considerable margin, which is kind of fun in a sick way, and I did note an improvement to the image, and they seem to have picked up a little bit of speed. But now that bass dominates the sound, and the Bakun is kind of less desirable as a pairing for the Meze, stick with the lower powered amps. The Focal Utopia was another big surprise. The Utopia took advantage of that extra power. The image is precise as it ever has been, and the bass now jumps with impact and authority. It actually helps balance the Utopia a bit compared to other headphone amps. I thought the Bakun did good things for the Utopia's beryllium dynamic driver, though it's not quite to the level of the Cisfara or the Abyss in terms of overall sound and spectacle. I think they're still a treble-focused headphone, and I don't feel the sub the way I do on the Cisfara. This may come as something of a surprise. You know, I've kind of been like on an island by myself touting the HD-820, and with the Bakoon 13r, it was one of my more favorite pairings. I thought the Senny picked up a lot of detail and tons of slam. Boy, that thing pounds in the bass under the Bakun. I really enjoyed the benefits it got from what the Bakun was putting out. It still has the wacky sound stage, and at times they give you a little bit of a fishbowl effect, but I found the combo enjoyable and a total win. The ZMF Atrium benefited from the extra speed the Bakun seemed to be putting out. The one thing I noted is that the sound shed some of its darkness. Not all, but some. And it really amped the clarity and the detail of the headphone. Not to Cisfara levels or anywhere near there, but the headphone still slams out with the best of them, though it still does lack that sub bass that came out of nowhere when I plugged in the Cisfara. The image was already spectacular, and I still consider the Atrium one of 2022's best new products, and the Bakun cemented that opinion. Yes, because they are planers, they can take an insane amount of power. I gave the 7Hz Timeless a spin on the Bakun, and shockingly, these things scaled tremendously well under the Bakun. Deep, deep bass, gorgeous sparkle through the treble. On harder material like rock and metal, things got a little bit on the grainy side. I assumed the headphone was being a little bit overdriven, particularly with that dense music, but they fared really nicely under easy listening music. Overall, it was a pretty fun experiment. Not something I'd do daily. I think the 7Hz is probably better served under the WA11 Topaz. The Noble Viking Ragnar were less grainy than the Timeless on the Bakun, but honestly I couldn't push the volume very hard, even under low power, and it wasn't enough there to activate that sensational sub bass the way that the Topaz did. And the Bakun is so hyper detailed, it became a treble dominant experience. Not shouty, but you could hear every tiny micro detail in the treble, including tape hiss on older material. Just a bit too much going on to call it a successful pairing. So as you can tell, I hope, the Bakoon 13R not only completely changes the Cisfara, but it improves almost any headphone I paired with them, except maybe the Meze Elite, which seemed overwhelmed by all the power. I really do feel I'm hearing the best from the Cisfara for the first time, but it also helped out many of my other headphones. The funny thing is, I think this $6,000 experiment has me questioning the need for the Ferrum ore stack more than it has me wondering about the viability of the Cisfara. The most shocking thing isn't the effect the Bakoon 13R has had on the Cisfara, though it's impressive, but it's the incredible way it's improved nearly all of my headphones. It has made a considerable impact on the Focal Utopia and made a dramatic improvement on the Sennheiser HD-820. I can't stop A-B'ing my collection between the Ferrum stack and the Bakun. The Bakun is a remarkable amp that impresses me nearly every time I plug something into it. And that's a big part of this story. Don't discount that. The enjoyment of the audio journey. You make changes expecting one thing, and you get surprised when you come across a result you didn't expect. The Bakun is an amp that's making me go back and reassess all of my other headphones. How fun is that? All right, here's the thing, or one of the things. Under the Bakoon Cisfara combo, I was listening to Pink Floyd's Animals. It's my personal favorite Pink Floyd album. I know, I'm weird. Welcome to the Director's Garage. So I wanted to play my highest resolution file, and that was 88.2. I start playing it, and I'm like, you know, this isn't the best mix. So let's go back to that OG 44.1 file. And I'm like, okay, that's the album. There it is. The 88.2 file had better quality, but the mix was off. Then I downloaded the 96K file, which is the 2018 remix. And I'm like, immediately, the music sounds better. They've cleaned up the soundstage. But they've completely screwed with the presentation of the vocals. They pulled the vocals too far forward and eliminated the spring reverb that echoed and echoed into Narnia on the original mix of Pigs on the Wing. Then, on Pigs, Roger's chorus, Roger's double-tracked to the far left and right and pulled forward. It sounds good, but it's not the same song as it was recorded back in 1976 and released in January of 1977. Sonically, the 2018 mix is superior, but the mix on the vocals feels out of place. So where am I going with this? Well, the Cisfara under the Bakun dissects the music into that level of granularity. You will notice even the most subtle change to something that should be unquestionably familiar. And for the first time with the Bakoon 13R powering the Cisfara, I can make a justification for this being a $6,000 headphone. Switching between headphones and amps, the sound floor is gone. They sound infinitely quiet in the dark spaces in the soundstage. They present detail only matched by the very best headphones. I'm talking about electrostatics and the LCD-5. But they now convey an emotion I haven't before heard from this flagship. The immersion factor is still greater on the Abyss over the Cisfara. But the case for best overall headphone got a whole lot more complicated. I think it's still the Abyss. I think. But it's not as clear-cut as it was when I did the Mega Shootout. The Abyss gives you nearly all the detail of the Cisfara, but it maintains the bass insanity of the LCD-4 with an incredibly wide soundstage in comparison to the Cisfara. It's kind of the best of all worlds, but the Cisfara now presents something spectacular that it did not before I put the Bakun in the chain, elevating what was a troublesome experience into something sublime. Now, it finally has given the Cisfara a wow factor, but with a more intimate presentation than the Abyss, and it does it with greater speed. Is there still higher ground for the Cisfara? Probably. And I've already received suggestions from folks who are perfectly happy to spend my money for me. This show's going broke, folks. But at least now I have a reason to keep the Cisfara around for a while longer. So that's the Bakoon 13R. Now I know this was a longer video, but it took a lot of listening and back and forth to hear what the different combinations were doing and how the headphones were sounding against each other. This is when I politely ask you to subscribe to the Director's Garage to make all that pain worth it. And because there's so much more ahead, I have a new blind unboxing from Audio 46. I have no idea what they sent us. We're going to do that one together, some live action. Also, a major new flagship that I bought on New Year's Eve. That should be getting here by the time this episode hits air. Plus, A full breakdown and sound check of that amazing Noble Audio Viking Ragnar. Oh my God. The more I hear that IEM, the more I'm convinced it's the best ever created. So much to say about that one. So give this episode a thumbs up or smash it if you hated it. I'm good either way, but I'll see you before you know it.